I've always loved the solitude of camping alone. For me, there's nothing quite like being surrounded by nature, away from the noise of the city. I'd been to this particular campsite several times before, a secluded spot deep in the woods, far from the main trails. It was the perfect place to unwind and disconnect from the world. This time, I arrived later than usual. By the time I set up my tent and got a fire going, the sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving the forest bathed in the dim, fading light of dusk. I didn't mind. I'd camped here enough to feel comfortable, even in the dark. As I cooked dinner over the fire, the only sounds were the crackling flames and the distant calls of night birds. After eating, I leaned back against a log, enjoying the warmth of the fire and the clear view of the stars above. The isolation was comforting, but I couldn't shake a strange feeling that had settled in my gut. It was a sensation I couldn't quite explain, like I was being watched. I dismissed it at first, blaming it on the creeping chill of the evening and my own overactive imagination. But then I saw him. At first, it was just a shadow, a vague shape standing among the trees on the edge of my campsite, maybe 30 or 40 feet away. The light from my fire didn't reach that far, so I could only make out the silhouette of a man. He was standing completely still, almost blending into the darkness. I squinted, trying to make out more details, but the shadows obscured him. My heart rate picked up. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I help you?" No response. The figure remained motionless, watching. I felt a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, a mix of fear and uncertainty. I'd heard stories of drifters or hunters wandering into campsites by mistake. But this was different. There was something unsettling about the way he stood there, just beyond the light, silent and unmoving. I considered grabbing my flashlight, but a part of me didn't want to see him any clearer. "Hey!" I shouted again, more forcefully this time. "This is private property. You need to leave." Still, nothing. Not a sound. Not a single movement. I decided to stand up, hoping the sight of me getting to my feet would make him realize I wasn't just some easy target. I'm not a big guy, but I tried to look as intimidating as possible. "I'm armed," I lied, "and I've got a phone to call the police." At that, the figure shifted slightly, but instead of walking away or saying anything, he just crouched down. It was a slow, deliberate movement, like he was sizing me up or trying to make himself less visible. My stomach dropped, and a cold wave of dread washed over me. This wasn't normal. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward him, my hand trembling. The beam cut through the darkness, and for a second I thought I'd see a face staring back at me. But by the time the light reached where he'd been standing, the figure was gone. I scanned the trees, my breath quickening, but there was no trace of him. "Who the hell are you?" I shouted into the darkness. I kept the flashlight on, shining it around the perimeter of my campsite, but there was no movement, no sound, except for the crackling fire. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was a lost hiker, or maybe a poacher who didn't want to be caught. But why would he just stand there watching me? I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself down. I told myself he was gone, probably spooked by my flashlight and my threat to call the police. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. I sat back down by the fire, keeping my flashlight close and my ears tuned for any sound, no matter how small. Minutes passed, then an hour. The fire was dying down, and I hadn't seen or heard anything more. I convinced myself that whoever it was had moved on, and that I should just try to get some sleep. I threw some dirt over the fire, dousing the flames, and crawled into my tent, zipping it up tight. But as I lay there, the darkness pressing in around me, I couldn't sleep. Every little noise, the rustling of leaves, the creak of a branch, set my nerves on edge. I kept picturing that dark figure, just standing there, watching me. I don't know how long I lay there, my eyes wide open, staring at the roof of my tent. Then I heard it, the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on dead leaves. My heart leapt into my throat. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, straining to hear. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, moving closer to my tent. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but I knew he was out there, creeping around the edge of my campsite. I cursed myself for putting out the fire. I reached for my flashlight, my hand shaking uncontrollably. The footsteps stopped. For a long, agonizing moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the zipper of my tent's front flap moved, ever so slightly, like someone was testing it. My blood turned to ice. "Get away," I shouted, fumbling to turn on my flashlight. I managed to click it on, shining it directly at the front of my tent. Through the thin fabric, I could see the silhouette of a hand, fingers curling around the zipper. Whoever was out there had been about to open it. The hand pulled away, and I heard the footsteps retreat, fading into the distance. I sat up, breathing heavily, my body drenched in sweat. I had to get out of there. I unzipped my tent cautiously and shined my flashlight around the campsite. There was no sign of him, but I knew he could be hiding just beyond the trees. I grabbed my backpack, leaving most of my gear behind, and bolted. I didn't care if I had to hike through the woods in the dark. I wasn't spending another minute there. I made my way down the narrow trail, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly with each step. I glanced over my shoulder constantly, expecting to see him behind me. Every rustle in the underbrush, every snap of a twig sent my heart racing. I'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. Just off the trail, illuminated by the moonlight, was a small clearing. And in that clearing, I saw a figure, a man, standing with his back to me. His posture was rigid, his head slightly tilted as if listening for something. For a moment, I thought he hadn't seen me. I took a step back, trying to stay quiet. But then he turned. The beam of my flashlight caught his face. A middle-aged man with a scraggly beard, his eyes wide and wild. For a split second, we stared at each other, and I saw something in his expression that chilled me to my core. Pure, unrestrained malice. He took a step toward me. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, sprinting down the trail as fast as I could. I could hear him crashing through the underbrush behind me, his footsteps fast and heavy. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, my legs burning, my lungs screaming for air. After what felt like an eternity, I saw the dim glow of the trailhead parking lot through the trees. I pushed myself harder, bursting out of the woods and into the open space. I ran straight to my car, fumbling with my keys, and threw myself inside, locking the doors. I sat there, panting, my eyes glued to the tree line. I expected to see him emerge any second, that wild look still in his eyes, but he never came out. I didn't wait to find out why. I started the car and sped away, not stopping until I was miles away from that forest. I never went back to that campsite. I still go camping sometimes, but never alone, and never anywhere too far from other people, because I know he's still out there, somewhere in those woods, waiting, watching, and I don't ever want to see him again.